Okay, so today we also did cell theory. And so the objectives for today is to understand the three main parts of cell theory. We're going to learn about the scientists who contributed to cell theory, and then talk a little bit about why it is a theory. Okay, so these are the notes that it goes on. It says, what is the cell theory? Okay, little boxes. So you don't have to take a whole ton of notes, just kind of listen as we go and ingest as much as you can. I'll kind of tell you what I wrote in my boxes. So if you have the same thing, then that's good. Then you didn't have to write too much, okay? So early contributors, scientists that helped contribute to the cell theory. Robert Hooke, he's the first person to see cells. And that's what I wrote in his little box right up here. First person to see cells, okay? So he was looking at cork and he noted that he saw a great many boxes. And so cork, if you know, comes from a tree or plant, okay? And so he noticed that there's all these little things, and they looked like cells, like a prison cell or a cell in a monastery or something, okay? So he called them cells. This was in 1665, okay? Then in 1673, Anton van Leeuwenhoek, he observed living cells in pond water, which he called animalcules. Now, Anton van Leeuwenhoek is credited with inventing the first microscope. Now, there's some debate out there of who actually did, but he perfected it more, was able to use it more to do scientific things with. So he studied pond water and thought he saw things called animalcules. These are some pictures of some of the things that he saw in the microscope, and he drew them. Okay, Theodore Schwann. How I remember this is like on the paper too, there's a swan there. So Schwann, he is a zoologist who observed tissues of animals and said all animals are made up of cells. They all have cells. So Schwann with the swan was a zoologist, right? And then the other S dude, so if you're ever matching like on the test, Matthias Schleiden, he was the botanist. Botanists is studying plants. And so he observed that the tissues of plants all contained cells. You guys, look at this. We go from 1673, when we get the microscope, to 1838, almost 150 years later. These scientists are finally coming up with, hey, all animals are made of cells. Hey, all plants are made up of cells. Okay. And then Robert Virchow, even years after that, reported that every living thing does actually are made up of cells. And he predicted that all cells come from other cells. So not only does everything that's alive have cells, but those cells have split and come from other cells. Okay, that's how they grow. They grow right from themselves. So the three parts of cell theory are, the first is every living thing is made of one or more cells. Okay, and I wrote everything living made of one or more cells. Real simple. The next part is the cell is the basic unit of structure and organization in organisms. A simple way to say this is the cell is the basic unit of life. Okay. And then the third part is that all cells come from pre-existing cells. So if you weren't on our Google Meet today, we talked about this a little bit. If you weren't on there, I want you to think about the part of this cell theory that is fact and part that we don't quite have the complete answer to. Therefore, that's what makes this theory still, okay? So a theory is something that that scientists, it's based on facts and things that we can test, but there's some part of it still that's not completely proven to make it a truth, okay, a biological principle truth. So by looking at these things, every living organism is made up of one or more cells. Okay, that's something that we can test in as fact. The cell is the basic unit of life. So everything living, if we were to break it down, we would find that it's made of cells. Okay, yeah, we can do that. All cells arise from pre-existing cells. Let's see, if you take your skin, and your body recreates, replenishes your skin every 27 days. So those are changing out pretty fast, right? The skin in your mouth, those are they actually generate quicker because you're chewing and things are scraping across the sides, right? You're losing those a lot faster. Those will generate quicker, but regular skin, 27 days, okay? So let's go back. The skin that I have on my body right now, 27 days ago, those cells came from other cells. And before that, they came from other cells, and those came from other cells, and those came from other cells. And then if you go back to everything comes from, I go back to one cell that my mommy and daddy put together, right? So you keep going back to, where did the first cell come from? If all cells come from pre-existing cells, where did that first cell come from? Okay, so that's what keeps this as a theory. Awesome. Okay, there's one last thing. There's the paragraph on here, and it just says, how do you think the invention of the microscope influenced the cell theory? So go ahead and write a little something there about why do you think the microscope was important in coming up with cell theory. As a matter of fact, I'll give you a few seconds here. If you want to stop it, write it, and then go back, you can. Okay, but then I'll have a little discussion on my own of why. 3, 2, 1. Okay, so cells are small. They are really, really small. And as a matter of fact, you really can't just see a cell. You need to have the microscope to see them. Now, as I talked about skin being replaced, right? Most of the dust in your house is skin cells that have been sloughed off bodies. So gross fact there. So it's quite small. Unless you have it with a microscope and can look at it and see it, you don't really can't see all the parts of it either. We do some fun, we've got a couple of microscope activities. We'll look at pond water under the microscope. We look at sponge under the microscope. Now, a sponge is a real animal. The sponge that you probably clean your dishes with, that's probably a synthetic sponge that's been made in a factory. But an actual sponge, if you see the old like sponges that are kind of brown, and you might see them at spas or in some people's bathroom, they'll use a real sponge. So those are sponges that have been harvested from the ocean and then dried out. So they're dead sponge, but they were once a living organism. We actually pull pieces off of a real sponge and look at them under the microscope too. So the microscope's pretty fun, pretty cool to do, to see and look at things a lot closer. Okay, that is it for cell theory. Remember, the 3 parts of the cell theory, you're going to need to know the main contributors of people who put that cell theory together. And that's pretty much it. Okay, see you in the next one.